Welcome to This Week in West Hempstead, sponsored this week by Creative Corner. We have a special guest today. Take it away, Dave, and introduce us.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Norm. We have a special guest with us. We have Mike Sigal. Mike, welcome to the set.
Thank you.
And welcome to the presidential section of West Hempstead. We're glad that you can make it. For those of you who don't know Mike, Mike, you're a wholesale beautician products by
wholesale beauty supplier.
Beauty supply.
I'm definitely not a beautician.
I knew I was going to screw that up.
This is not a beautician. Yes.
You didn't go to the hair salon before you came over?
Well, here's the deal. I sell shampoo and nail polish, and if you look at me, you must think I'm a hell of a salesman.
I think so. I'm going to buy it. Listen, I'm exactly with you. So. Okay, let's get past that. And on top of all of that, you're also a karate expert. You're a black belt or something that you can kick my butt. And
yes, that was actually part of the deal that I would get to hit you at some point during the interview. I've been doing martial arts for 30 years. I've been a black belt for 20 of those.
That's great. And you have a dojo in Malvern?
I teach 3 nights a week in Malvern, in the basement of the post office at the Malvern School of Self-Defense.
Wow, that's amazing. And, how's the numbers going just, in our sort of post-COVID or whatever mode that we're in now? Are people actually coming back into the dojo in person?
Yes, we were, at the beginning of COVID, we were pretty much out of business in person. We were not allowed to be in person. We were treated like a gym, I guess, and back then, if you remember, everybody was terrified anyway. So we were totally on Zoom. So I had to learn the technology of Zoom, and I was pretty lousy at it. And then eventually, I figured it out. I actually called a couple times your tech guy Dan for some advice because he lives across the street from me, and he was very helpful, if not snarky, but still very helpful. And
what else would you expect?
This is just part of the service we offer.
And then we went to, if you can believe it, in person in a backyard with masks on. It sounds so silly now, 6 feet apart. And my students were very loyal and very interested in continuing the school. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to continue. And then eventually we worked back into the dojo. Some people were still uncomfortable with it, so we were doing Zoom and in the dojo, and that's any teacher out there will tell you that's a very different type of teaching live and on Zoom at the same time. It was pretty challenging, and still we have left over from that a Sunday morning international class where I teach people in Israel and Mexico and Florida and Long Island on Zoom who are not in person, who just want to keep training.
Wow. That's amazing. So, during COVID, I saw Cobra Kai or Karate Kid. That was my contribution to the world of karate, but it was pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for the next.
I was a big Karate Kid fan as a kid and loved the series. It was silly, and it was just goofy, but it was some of these series on TV.
It was entertaining.
It was entertaining, and it just brings back memories of a different time.
So, getting into a more serious subject, I'm going to talk about safety around West Hempstead in particular. So, there's an organization called CSS, which stands for
Community Security Service.
Community Security Service, and I know that you've been part of that organization almost from day one, if not from day one itself. You're currently a regional trainer and a team leader. Tell us a little bit about CSS and what its goals and mission is.
Well, I just want to be clear, first of all, that I'm not here as a CSS representative. This is an interview with Mike Sigal, not necessarily CSS. But CSS has been a large part of my life for about 7 years now. It is as far as I know, the largest volunteer Jewish security organization in the country. We're in 16 states. Our goal and our job is to help in any way we can to stop an event from happening at our synagogue, to deter it, to detect it, to make it, when somebody shows up as to do harm to the Jewish people in a synagogue or in a school, the goal for me at CSS is to stop it long before it happens, is by being situationally aware and being a visible presence at the synagogue and training people to also be aware that hopefully it never happens. Because once somebody, we've seen countless times in the news, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish, once somebody shows up and wants to do harm at a religious institution, people get hurt. And the goal is for that to stop it before that happens.
Sure. No, understood. And it's such an important, vital, you play such an important, vital role in the community. And within personally from my own family, I come from a father who was an Army soldier in World War II, and my mother was a Holocaust survivor. So there's a certain sensitivity there to both the ability for the Jewish people to both protect themselves, and also, unfortunately, we were, victims of the greatest tragedy, and certainly in our times. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about security within the borders, but yet it's a very serious subject. And how do you deal with that?
Well, the first thing you do is, my martial arts background helped me a little bit with focusing, but it's not really about fighting. It's really about learning about security. It's really about learning about terrorist events and studying what we can find from them. For example, we all remember a couple of years ago, there was this guy in Tribeca who drove a pickup truck down a bike
right
path.
down the crowd. Yep.
I think he killed 6 or 7 people. It was horrible. Well, when you study that event, and everywhere in Manhattan is pretty much under some sort of video surveillance, you look back a week before the guy was there. You look back 2 weeks before the guy was there. Now, it's a bike path in Tribeca, so there's thousands of people, you wouldn't see him. But maybe outside your synagogue, and when I go speak to synagogues, when I speak to schools, I've done this with my mother-in-law's synagogue, I've done it with several synagogues here in West Hempstead. When you look at that and you decide what car or what person doesn't belong in front of your synagogue, when you're there and you're so familiar with it, because you're there every day, or you're there every Shabbos, or if it's a church, you're there every Sunday, and you really get a feel for your street and your neighborhood, and you could see something happening, hopefully, before it happens, and hopefully they'll see you too, and maybe they'll just move along.
And you also raise an interesting point about the churches and other religious institutions in place of gatherings. Today, we're living in a really crazy time with, you talk about people taking cars and running through, mass crowds with mass casualties. You have all the issues going on with guns and with assault rifles and, all of that kind of stuff. So the issue, as opposed to where I was going with World War II, is really not what we're talking about. We're talking about safety for community organizations. So the question is, it's not just about synagogues. It's about churches, and it's about other, mosques and other religious organizations, right?
I think it's not just religious organizations. I think if you work for a company, for any company, if you're in a school, any school, elementary school, high school, college, doesn't matter, you have some sort of plan.
Yeah.
And I think that is very important. I think people forget. I just thought of this actually coming over here today. Plan, I believe, is a verb and a noun. That you have to have a plan, but you also have to plan for things to happen. And the time you want to know what to do in a fire, in any emergency situation, a live shooter, in a vehicle situation, when you're walking down the street, when you're at work, when you're at school, when you're in your synagogue or your church, you want to have that plan in mind before something happens.
So what we're talking about here, I guess, they call soft targets, right? How do you prevent yourself from being a soft target? So I guess in a practical sense, are there things that people can do? Obviously, they can volunteer for CSS or, other local things. Are there things that the ordinary person can do to sort of make sure they're aware of what's going on and perhaps help their organizations sort of, again, make sure they're not a soft target?
Well, the first thing we learned when we started doing this, and again, I'm not a police officer, I've never been in the Army, my security background is entirely synagogue security. The thing we learned when we first started is, in order to protect your building, you have to make your building a little bit harder to target. You have to harden that target. And that doesn't mean you have to build walls with barbed wire. You have to be able, I found in life, it's very easy to say, there's nothing I could do. It's too hard. It's too big a job. It's too hard. Well, walk around your house and see if all your windows and doors close and lock. Most people, if my front door didn't lock, I would call a locksmith. I would call Norm and say, hey, how do I fix my door? Because I'm not very, very handy. And he would say, stop calling me, leave me alone. I don't work for you. But most of the time, I would call a locksmith, I would call a handyman, I would get my front door to lock. It's the same thing in any organization's building. You want to make sure that door locks. You want to make sure those windows lock. You want to make sure, like we just had a horrible, horrible situation in Texas, and there's constantly news coming out, and it's never the story that it was the first day it happened, where it sounds like there was a door that was open, that it was jammed open, and then they closed it because they heard there was a shooter, and maybe they didn't lock it when they closed it, or maybe they did, or who knows what happened. But that's the kind of thing you want to figure out long before somebody shows up at your place looking to do harm. Sure. So it's those kind of things, and those are easy things to do.
Yes, so some of the truly easiest things you can do is lock your car doors. The biggest crimes that we have, thank God, in West Hempstead are the thefts of car materials inside. You leave a radio, you leave a phone, you leave some keys in the car, and then all of a sudden it becomes a big problem. But the police department in West Hempstead has said over and over again, that's the main problem. If you lock the doors, you prevent the crime. It's literally that simple. Just awareness. Yep. It's about awareness.
Absolutely. And, on sort of the angle of the synagogues, I don't know if everyone in the community really has an appreciation for what CSS does and also the impact that it has. Imagine, if you will, you're sitting in a synagogue, you go there, or a church, and you go there to pray, and all of a sudden someone bursts through and says, this is a drill, everyone get on the floor, and you kind of have to just listen to what they're saying, and all of a sudden you just went to pray and maybe talk to your friends and have a good time. The next thing you know, you're face down on the floor saying, holy crap, is this the end, or why am I going through the drills? We have to be very sensitive to the world that we're in, and the fact that what Mike and his team are doing is really preparing us for something that we hope never happens. But the simple fact that we have to do it is not great, but we have to realize that is just the world that we're living in for all the reasons that we've been talking about.
Those drills, and I've done several of them. I've helped people do them. I've been involved in several of them. Those drills, whether they're evacuation drills or lockdown drills, those drills are very important for your security team. They're very important to know one of the reasons one of the things I like to happen in a drill is for things to go wrong, to find out that this didn't work. Because that's when you want to find out that it doesn't work. And you could tabletop it all you want. You could talk about it. We're here in the basement in the great presidential section here in West Hempstead. We could talk about drills and doing this and locking that door and checking that window. But when you go to lock that door and the lock doesn't work, or you decide that this person's going to come in and lock the door, but they can't get into the room, or you figure out something that's wrong, or you trip over your own 2 feet. Those are things we need to know. And those roles that individuals have, whether it's calling the police, whether it's announcing a lockdown, what that is, we need everybody to practice those roles, because in an emergency situation, your pulse is going to be racing. You're not going to be thinking clearly. And I learned very early in my training that you will not rise to the occasion. In a scary situation, you will drop down to whatever you've been drilled, whatever muscle memory you have, if you're lucky.
Yeah, I've drilled with Mike and at the local synagogue, and I can't tell you how valuable they are. From getting doors locked down to informing people about what they should expect, having lights turned off just like they do in schools. They're pretty common routines that need to be taken, but there needs to be leadership. And as you've seen in Texas, leadership is a big problem in some places, even the most professional.
But let's actually talk about that for a second. We mentioned schools a couple of times. We all unfortunately know how many circumstances. How would you? Are there ways that you can go about this with kids, particularly to if they've got to go through drills? I imagine they've got kids in the synagogues and the churches. how do you do something like this to get them ready to deal with it without like really sending the kids freaked out? Like, what can you do?
As someone who's been running a volunteer organization for a while and now is taking a step back and is just more of a helper, I could tell you use your resources. So my resources in my synagogue, I had no idea how nursery-age children lock down. I would have no idea what they do. I don't know how to do it. I don't know anything about it. My youngest child is 21. I don't know. I didn't have lockdowns when I was a kid in school. I don't think any of us this age had lockdowns when we were in school.
We had duck and cover.
So we
Nuclear
have several,
war, maybe, but
in our synagogue and in many places, we have several nursery school teachers, and we have several preschool teachers and several elementary school teachers, and principals, and you talk to them, and you get the information about what works best at their school. What works best with 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds is the teacher amazingly, and I've seen this on the drill a few times, the teacher amazingly keeps her voice steady and says, okay, it's time to read a book in the corner, and they go in the corner and read a book. And she reads to them, and they stay as quiet as possible. Remember, the purpose of a lockdown is to pretend or to act like that room is empty. Because everything we've studied that, in a live shooter situation, if the room is dark, if the room is perceived as empty, if the room is quiet, the shooter, even if they went to school there, even if they work there, even if they have knowledge of them and they have a weapon in their hands that could easily go through that locked door, they move on to the next door. They're somewhat lazy, I guess. Mm-hmm. They want an easy target. As far as older kids, I think it's age appropriate to whatever age kids it is. And again, you use your resources. One of the great things we have here in West Hempstead is we're part of Nassau County. Nassau County has a Homeland Security division in every police precinct. And the guys and girls that work in the Homeland Security precinct are so happy to come to your institution and do an assessment and help you figure out exactly what to do. That's great. Mike Sigal's just a volunteer. I can volunteer. I can talk about it all day, but really I'm just a volunteer, and I haven't studied it. I don't have a degree in it. There are people that have studied it a lot more than me, and they're the ones to get the information from.
That's great, because that was really actually my next question. And you kind of answered it. The role of the police. Take a time period 20 years ago, before there was CSS or even the thought of CSS. God forbid if there was a situation. Of course, you would just expect the police to be there. That was your only first and last point of recourse. How do the outside of the Homeland Security, which is amazing, but like your typical police that are going up and down Hempstead Avenue, how do they perceive CSS? Are they? It's complementary to what they're doing. Is it a challenge to what they're doing?
Every interaction I've had with Nassau County PD has been positive.
Great.
I've unfortunately had to call 911, and as an Orthodox Jew, to use your phone on Shabbos is a strange thing. It's not something we do. I've had to call 911 several times in my synagogue. Mostly, it's involved a guy driving by and yelling something, or somebody walking by and acting strangely, or a car that made us nervous or something like that. In each case, it's turned out when I've called about people, it's turned out to be a jerk, not a terrorist. Mm-hmm. But I've never, not once gotten the response of, "Oh, you shouldn't have called. Oh, what are you wasting our time for?" I've never gotten that response.
Actually, they encourage us to call.
Yeah.
They want to be involved. They don't want us taking law into our own hands. Mm-hmm. So they do have a very proactive team that they follow up on every call. You can get a response back and understand how it transacted. And we have technology. Today we have cell phones, we have cameras, panic alarms. There's all kinds of layered effects you can do to make your harden the target.
That's great. It's the truth is, it's a community-wide effort. We're really living in strange times, and it does require extraordinary efforts, and it does require volunteers like Mike and like others. And you, Norm, and you, Dan, to kind of step up and just say, we're going to protect what's most important to us, which is our community, our children, our family. That's all we got. So, Mike, I want to thank you very much for all that you're doing on behalf of everyone in the community. And we look forward to having you back on set. And getting into some other stories that are not necessarily as heavy as security, but certainly there's nothing more important than our security.
Well, I've enjoyed being here, and if I can leave you with one final thought, you mentioned Dan and you mentioned Norm. They're both volunteers on their shul security teams, Dave. And your job, but everybody has a job.
Guys, don't you need to protect someone? I mean, like if everyone volunteered, you got to protect the football. So I figured that someone's holding the football.
I'm here to protect.
You're
Mike.
also
that's my main job is to protect Mike.
So you're you're also, Dave, a lot smaller than me. So I physically could throw you at the threat.
That's going to be a really, really good podcast.
In all seriousness,
the point is very well taken.
In all seriousness, everybody has a role to play. Whether that's being on a security team or just learning about it, everybody has something they can contribute. And we look forward to all your contributions.
Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Norm, and Dan, and Mike, we really appreciate all your time tonight. And thank you for this special edition of This Week in West Hempstead.
Thanks for joining us. As always, if you'd like to sponsor this or our other shows, please reach out at sales@westhempsteadecho.com.